Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to start this meeting, which is part of Galicia Jewish Museum's program, Galicia, Here We Read. And today we have a very special meeting with Grzegorz Kwiatkowski, the author of Karl Heinz M. Grzegorz Kwiatkowski is a writer, a poet, a musician. The list of different projects in literature and music that Grzegorz is involved in is very, very long. And we're very happy to have with us Zach Berger, writer and translator. And this very special meeting will be conducted by Karen Underhill, who is assistant professor of Polish literature and Jewish studies at the University of Illinois in Chicago. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. I'm really glad to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me? Okay, so I wanted to thank you, Grzegorz, for inviting Zach and me back. We had the chance to meet you and discuss your poetry at Johns Hopkins University earlier this spring, and this is a continuation, and I'm glad we have more time to continue. It was a very rich conversation. So before we begin the first part of the reading, I just want to say how the session will look. We've divided it up into 3 separate readings, and we'll address different questions after each part. But before jumping in to the first section, Grzegorz, I wanted to invite you to provide just some very initial context for the poems that our audience will hear. They are very short poems, epigrammatic in style, and they can be difficult and upsetting or shocking in their content. They focus on individual people, real people who were involved in the Holocaust, whether as victims or perpetrators. And one critic compared your work here to Brechtian theater, in which the actor presents a number of subjects, plays a number of subjects, not to necessarily stir up our empathy with them, but in order that we should be thrown back upon our own critical and ethical engagement, even in the form of anger or indignation. So I just want to invite you to orient us by saying a bit more about how these poems arose. Who are your subjects, your speakers that you're giving voice to, and how did you choose them?
So I think that my focus on this tragic part of humanity is kind of a natural situation, because I was born in Gdańsk, and I live in Gdańsk. So the Second World War started in Gdańsk, which is really very tragic and very important. And my family, my grandfather was a prisoner of a concentration camp, and his sister was a prisoner of concentration camp Stutthof. So this experience broke them in psychological way, and it had very big impact on my family and on my father. So I am, in some way, first generation who is dealing with this tragic past with this kind of a distance. And I think that this rather big distance gives me a lot of freedom to try to understand this root situation. And so I'm just, I'm just still trying to understand the human ability to murder others and to hate others and to lie to others. And I thought today, because I had a thought that you will ask me about it, so I thought, what is my main motor, my main to write these kind of poems? And I thought that my main thing in my life is that not my grandfather from concentration camp, but my mother, because my mother, I know that I shouldn't say bad words about my mother, but I love my mother. It's but anyway, my mother is the biggest liar I know, in the whole history of humanity. So I was in some way always fighting with people who lies in every way. You know what I mean? I've got an instinct to when something is wrong, when something is happening in injustice way, if something is false, I think that the main problem of my poetry or issue is uncovering things that are covered. That's the point. And in some way, my fighting with my mother, of course, pacifistic fighting, you know what I mean, but struggling with a lot of different perspectives on the world, gave me this this will to uncovering things that are covered, that are, you know, that, for example, manipulations of history, manipulations of made by cynical populistic parties, etc. So I think I've got in some way I hate the situation of lying, and this is the point. But of course I hate to hate, and this is another thing that I hate to have this ability to hate something, even if it's a bad thing.
Thank you. And that's very interesting addition to what we discussed last time. But I also want to ask you just to say a word for us, because we're about to hear the voices that you've uncovered in seeking to restore the truth. We're going to hear voices of people whom I understand were alive, not fictional. How did you choose them? Where did you find them?
It's very complicated situation. I think that because I'm also a musician, and I think that for me very important thing is the musical moment of something, of when something is saying something, you know, in the bus or in a tram or in some testimonies, or, you know, 100 years ago. So I hear moments of a poetry, of a music in a let's say real stuff, and for me this is the moment of kind of a moral breakthrough moment. So I'm trying to be as close as possible to reality, but of course it's still poetry, so it's impossible. But I'm trying as hard as I can to be as close to the true stuff as I can, and I just know when I'm hearing some testimony, or when my grandfather in a museum of concentration camp was telling me his experience. So suddenly I just know that I have to write it down. You know what I mean? That this is the moment, I have to do it. That's all. You know, and so I'm just doing it all the time for 20 years, and I've got one big document. It's one document now. It's few thousands of pages, and I'm just going round and round. This document is longer and longer, and I'm scanning it from A to Z, from Z to A, and I'm doing it all the time and I make some research of mine in my notes to find this moment of music, but also a moment of demythologization, and a moment of uncovering process, something like that.
Thank you. I think it's definitely time to read some poetry. And so, was there an introduction for Zach, Grzegorz? Did we? We're so honored to have reading your poetry today. An accomplished poet unto himself, and Yiddishist, and translator of Yiddish literature, and translator of English literature into Yiddish, including Dr. Seuss and Winnie the Pooh, I think. And Zach, maybe I can ask you to tell us the names of a couple of your volumes of poetry.
Sure. So I will remark that recently, in the past year, the White Goat Press, as part of the Yiddish Book Center, published a volume of translations of mine of the prose poetry of the great Yiddish poet Avram Sutzkever under the title Essential Prose. And the previous volume I published of my own poetry and translations of various poets came out under the name All the Holes Line Up. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to read Grzegorz poetry.
And Zach is really, it's an honor that you are here, because Zach is he's a really great poet and great translator. So it's a great joy and great honor. Thank you.
Familiarize yourself with his work, and hopefully at the next festival will be an event focusing on it. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and share. Can you see, Zach, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to leave, if that's okay. Oops. And I apologize in advance for the technical glitches, which there will be. I'm going to leave the side open like that, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so there we go. That these poems were translated by Peter Constantine. Okay, so I'm going to ask Grzegorz go ahead and read the Polish and Zach the English afterwards.
I'm sorry, Karen, could you make it any larger?
Okay, sure. I'll go ahead and make it full screen.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Plony. Nasz prawdziwy zawód to rolnictwo, nie zabijanie, chociaż przyznaję, rzezie na bagnach odbywały się w rytmie prac sezonowych i kiedy były duże deszcze, nie wychodziliśmy po plony.
Crops. Our real work is farm work, not killing, although I will admit the massacres in the swamps took place in the rhythm of our seasonal labor, and when the rains were heavy, we did not go out for crops.
Walter Stier. Mój ojciec, dobry pracownik biurowy kolei, nigdy nie uczestniczył w żadnym rozstrzelaniu, tylko wykonywał swoją pracę. Organizował transporty na wschód i na zachód, na północ i południe, w górę i w dół.
Walter Stier. My father, a decent office worker in the railways, never took part in any of the shootings. He was just doing his job, organizing transports, eastward and westward, north and south, back and forth.
Mogił. Trupy wrzucano do studni, zakopywano w dołach, ziemiankach i końskich mogiłach, a potem dzieci wyciągały je ze studni, z dołów, z ziemianek i z końskich mogił.
Graves. Corpses were thrown into the well, buried in pits, dugouts, in horse graves, and then the children pulled them out from the well, from the pits, from the dugouts, and from the horses' graves.
Zach, are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Leśnik Dance. Podczas wojny układaliśmy ciała jak drewno, ale już po wojnie układaliśmy w lesie drewno, jak świeżo ścięte ciała.
Ranger Dance. During the war, we laid out bodies like wood, but after the war, we laid out wood in the forest, like freshly felled bodies.
Okay. I think I'm going to break here for a brief period of discussion. Thank you. So we can say, Grzegorz, that your work belongs to or is part of 2 decades, a generation of engagement by artists and historians with the fraught question of Holocaust memory in Poland. Since the publication of Jan Gross's book Neighbors in 2001, there has taken place a long period of soul searching within Polish society, and many Polish artists and writers, both Jewish and non-Jewish, have felt compelled to grapple with the place of the Holocaust in Polish collective memory, to change the relationship with the past that had been largely buried or repressed, pressed out of public discussion. So in its themes and its aesthetic choices, your poetry to me resonates with works that many in the audience will be familiar with, such as playwright Tadeusz Sobodzianek's play Nasza Klasa, Our Class, the detailed and groundbreaking research of Anna Bikont, Joanna Michlitz, and other scholars, the films Ida by Pawlikowski, Wrona's Demon, Pasikowski's Aftermath. These works have all recovered and returned to events and individuals with this kind of excruciating attention to detail. And they don't shy away from brutal imagery, from explorations of guilt. They emphasize the importance of memory, the need to give voice to victims, to uncover buried stories, to commemorate. So I wanted to share some information with the audience here about the reception of your poetry within this broader context. So in a sense, the debate that surrounded your publication of this poetry testifies to how seriously artists and scholars in Poland treat this question of Holocaust memory and Jewish memory, and how sensitive it is. So I think it could be illuminating for me to share some of the discussions around your work that have taken place within the Polish context. So when Karl Heinz M was published in 2019, it became the focus of an intense polemic on the pages of the journal Wizja that played out over about 6 months. A debate about the ethics of writing, speaking on behalf of victims of the Holocaust. It recalled earlier post-war discussions about the possibility of writing poetry after Auschwitz, and about the role of the poet in honoring the memory of the dead, shielding the flame, to use Hannah Krall's words. So Marta Tomczak started this debate. In her somewhat scathing critique, she cites a line from Susan Gubar's work on the Holocaust poetry of Irena Klepfish and Adrian Rich. She writes, "I can't bear the way they exploit the dead." For her, the poems in Karl Heinz M, and she's contrasting your work with that of Klepfish and Rich. For her, the poems in Karl Heinz M meaninglessly complicate their subject matter, giving to certain voices from the Holocaust many meanings, but flattening out their contents, flirting with Black humor, with the absurdity of totalitarianism, and even accusations against the innocent. Her critique is surprisingly personal when she writes, "The source of these poems is unfortunately not the experiences of the third generation or even close proximity to Gdańsk sites and non-sites of memory." Stanisław Obirek, a leading ethical voice in Polish public debate today, responded that, quote, "Our memory is a delicate structure, susceptible to many influences, not all of which we ourselves are conscious. This is true of both individual and collective memory. Some academic fields are wrapped up in trying to absolutize the methodology and the allowable and final form of memory." Obirek finds valuable here Michael Rothberg's concept of multidirectional memory to reflect on the divergent and multiple cultural forms that help carry forward memory. Quotes, "The timbre of these verses," he writes, referring to yours, "resonates with the rhythm of the songs from the music group Trupa Trupa, your own. The passage of time has led me to the conclusion that it is perhaps above all poets who truly have access to the black hole in the history of humanity that is the Holocaust of European Jewry." Anna Kaluza defended Marta Tomczak by arguing, "Let us imagine a work in which a crowd of pornographic images, a catalog of visual violence, a mnemosyne of suffering and torture does not raise any suspicions in us, whether cognitive or aesthetic. Let's imagine a world in which our only choice is to accept what artists, the objects of our worship, give us, a world without criticism. A work of art is there to be used, applied, it should do work, not to be defended." And in her essay as part of this debate, sociologist and scholar of Holocaust memory, Małgorzata Melchior wrote, "These verses have the power to move the reader deeply, to stir reflection about the complexity of human nature, the danger that the Holocaust represents, and the tragedy suffered by specific individuals. Both victims and executioners were human beings." She ends by emphasizing the need to respect the poet's particular right to give expression to the inexpressible, and especially to the horror of the Holocaust. Quotes, "Only the artist can carry forward memory when the last witnesses are gone." So what I want to ask you is, what was it like for you to be at the center of this debate? Was it unexpected for you? Did it change the way that you think about your own work?
I think it was great. It was like a great big miracle, and great. This first article was of course a bit surprising for me, but it was the tone of article, the moralistic aspects of it very shortly proved for me that it was very melodramatic stuff, let's say, and because of that, it's many miracles happened because people like Stanisław Obirek or Małgorzata Melchior or Leszek Szaruga, or even I think the biggest authority in these aspects, Professor Michał Głowinski, wrote me that this art is very powerful and innovative, and that I've got a right to write in the way I'm writing. But anyway, I'm super open on critics, so debate is also always a good thing, and dialogue is always a good thing. So great that we are talking. Great that we were talking. But of course, if someone says to me, you can't write in the way you're writing, even if you are third generation, it's a bit too much in a way, you know what I mean? But I'm happy that I wasn't only one who saw that, and I saw when you were reading that you also find it very bizarre, these kind of arguments. So I'm very happy because of this discussion around Karl Heinz M, and I think that because of this first article, it was kind of a resurrection of this poetry and this book. So I'm in some way I'm very lucky, and for this first voice who told me that I can't think and write as the way I'm doing it. And I'm very thankful.
We're going to talk about, with time allowing, many different contexts and comparisons and potential influences on you. But in the context of what you've just said, you mentioned to me a comparison with Tadeusz Różewicz's technique in putting together the poem Warkocz. Can you mention what it is you said about that? Kind of showing a tradition to this kind of drawing on factual sources.
It's the story of the poem Warkocz by Tadeusz Różewicz is of course the story of kind of a collage and montage, because Tadeusz Różewicz, this poem is made from parts of a reportage, from someone's reportage about a visit in a museum of Auschwitz. So this and many years after this poem were published, one of the scholar, I guess, Arkadiusz Morawiec, wrote a story of this poem. But it's not surprising that artists are making some things and making from some parts new objects. I think it's totally clean and clear, and of course intentions are very important. Yes, so I agree with suspicious in this area totally. So intentions are very important, but of course, when someone is dealing with his family history, I think it's really clear that he's dealing with his family history. You know what I mean? Can
you tell Grzegorz a bit more about that process for you of returning to the concentration camp in Stuttgart and what you experienced through that process?
Yeah, because for me it was most important. The story of mother is one story of lying mother, and the second story is the story of visit with my grandfather. We visited a museum of Stuttgart concentration camp, and it was first time he was there after war, and so he was reconstructing. He was crying. He was even shouting. He was, it was very, very emotional for him, and I don't remember now. I was 9 years old or 8 years old. Yeah, I was rather small. So for me, it was kind of an ethical shock. And so it was beginning of my obsession of trying to understand this predator human nature. You know what I mean? That why people, just obvious questions, but very important. Why people are murdering each other, why people are hating each other. So this is my question from very beginning, and I'm still asking, I'm still thinking about it. So for me it was a key situation. Then I found out, because I'm a father of almost 3 years old Franciszek Lew, and after all, I found out after many years that my wife roots are Jewish roots, and her grandmother was hiding in the forest near city of Rzeszów. But of course, it was a family secret. You know what I mean? That I just asked her grandmother a few years ago, what were she doing during the wartime? And she said, I was hiding in the forest. It's obvious because there was a war. So I asked her, so you've got Jewish roots? And she said, no, I hate Jewish people. So she started to say me all these anti-Semitic legends from medieval ages. She told me that she saw two boys who stole Holy Communion from the church, and then they crushed this Holy Communion on the meadow. So I said, that these are medieval ages story. I understand that you are afraid, but so it was the end of the conversation. And a few years after this conversation, because she was living in San Diego, so when she was dying in San Diego, she saw a Jewish doctor, and she said, "I'm a Jewish person. Can you help me?" But what I want to say is not top secret stories from my families, which are now not top secret, but I want to say that we are living in the country, rather dark country, and with a lot of dark, very tragic histories. And on the territory of Poland, there was the biggest genocide in the history of the world took place. So there are still a lot of ghosts in the air. You know what I mean? So I think we can hear it if we are focused on this thing. There are a lot of very tragic stories. And for example, I've got a house on the countryside, 70 kilometers from Gdańsk, and by an accident, I met there Mr. Albin Ossowski, who was an underground army soldier. Then he, after war, moved to London. He was a sculptor, but during the war, he was also in a Birkenau concentration camp. And I was making a documentary movie, after all, about him, because we found out that he was in some way assistant of Dr. Mengele, of course, as a war prisoner. But there are a lot of these kind of stories all around us. And of course, this story with almost 500,000 shoes from all concentration camps in Europe. And we found these shoes during shooting the documentary movie about Mr. Albin. And we are till me and my friend Rafał Wojciech, so till we are fighting with authorities from this museum for years.
Let me interrupt for a moment, because I think that particular story really attests to the sense of the responsibility to change something, to act on something. Can you explain what the story is about the shoes?
Yeah, we were shooting the documentary movie about this great person who was a prisoner and underground army soldier. And we went to the forest near the museum of Stutthof concentration camp, and we found shoes on the ground, and we and there were more shoes
outside
and more shoes.
The camp,
right near the fence, but outside, but near the fence. And we started to dig in the ground, and there were thousands of these shoes, thousands and thousands. And then we went to the boss of this museum concentration camp and we asked, we made a little research, but after all, he said us that these are shoes of prisoners, and most of them are from Auschwitz-Birkenau, because Stutthof concentration camp was a reparation center for all concentration camps in Europe. And in 1945, when the Red Army came to the camp, they numbered these shoes, and it was 500,000 pairs of shoes. There were mountains of shoes, and they were photographed. And in 1967, when they established museum of Stutthof concentration camp, they took a small part of these shoes as an exhibition, and most of them they moved to the forest like a trash. So and they were just in this forest for many years, and everyone knew about it. It wasn't a secret situation. Everyone knew about it, but as I told you, I don't like this kind of stuff, injustice or something which is covered and should be uncovered. So so when I saw it, I thought that we have to do something with that. So the boss of the museum said that he will not do with it anything, because this is a trash anyway. So we gave him 6 months for some secure operation. He didn't do anything. We called Polish media, and the Polish TV and every you know, they went to this forest. There were a lot of articles and materials in TV, but they didn't do anything. After 2 years, CBC made a reportage, but they still didn't do anything. Then the Guardian wrote a reportage, but they didn't do anything. And I was 1 year ago, they cleaned most of the shoes, and they decided that they will bury them once more, but on the territory of museum, which for me is one big scandal. You know, they took them and they decided that they will bury them once more. So they are hidden now. And for me, it's totally scandalous situation. And anyway, these shoes are still in the forest. Some of the shoes, the rest of them are still in the forest. I was there 2 weeks ago with my son, and we found hundreds of shoes, of children's shoes, and you know what I mean. Shoes
I'm sorry for the experience that must have been, more than once, and also for your son. It's a very sad metaphor, what you just described, for this process of seeking, uncovering, and then reburying, and this kind of struggle to press things out again from memory, and to bring them up. That sort of struck me in what you just told. Zach, are you with us? I wanted to invite you from your own perspective as a poet, as an American Jewish poet, you know, who approached Grzegor's work in a completely different way than myself, for example, to feel free to ask a question or an idea that it stimulates you to talk about.
Yes, and I want to again thank Grzegorz for his poetry, and I do have a question. And this story about the shoes was, you know, horrific, and the way it, of course, reminded me of many works about artifacts of destruction, and of Avram Sutzkever's Yiddish poem, A Wogen Schiech, A Wagon Full of Shoes, where he describes very almost empirically and almost coldly and clinically this, at the start of the poem, there's a wagon full of shoes, and then he asks where the shoes are off to, right? So he turns the view from a strictly documentary view into a view of memory, right? Who these shoes belong to. And it makes me think of your poems as in that space between documentation and memory. I'm really taken by, just as I was last time, of your description of your poetic process of the role, the continuous documentation of poems, right? Your continuous real-time accretion of poetry, like the rings of a tree, right? And it makes me think of a non-Jewish poet and someone who, I don't know if he's been translated to Polish, and I don't know if obviously you're very well read, but might not be. I don't know how much you've read him. The poet A.R. Ammons, a very important U.S. poet, very prominent in the 50s through the 80s, and he wrote in the 60s a poem called "Tale of a Tape," and he wrote it on a spool of, you know, calculators, right? Used to have a spool of paper, right? And so he wrote it on a spool of calculator paper. And Ammons was very much an empirical, scientific-minded poet. And it makes me think that your documentation, your memorialization, your poetic work is a kind of scientific work. And I hope that's not taken the wrong way. I don't mean in a clinically cold or detached way, but in an empiric, you know, scientific from the root of knowledge, right? And I wonder how you navigate that space between documentation and memory, and how much you worry about getting the facts right, and how much you worry about bearing witness, and how those things conflict.
I don't hear last words. I just need 4 last words by you. Witness, you said, what kind of witness?
So witness and documentation and facts, and how you whether you think there's a conflict between getting the facts right and getting the memories right, between bearing witness and getting down the facts, between the documentary impulse and the witness bearing impulse.
Yeah. So yeah. Thank you. So I think that we are still on the territory of art and on the territory of poetry and anyway on the territory of my imagination and of my perspective. So as I said at the beginning, I try to be as close as I can to the facts and to the history, but still this is the world of music and the world of poetry, and I try to be as in some way cold as I can, and I think that the biggest way to be to have a proper distance and not to go in the melodramatic fields is classical music that is played by Glenn Gould in a very neutral, non-melodramatic way. You know what I mean? That when you're dealing with this kind of horrors, you need some frontiers and barriers around you, not to be as much in the center or in the middle of the situation. So you need kind of I think that you need a distance, and I think that Glenn Gould, which was playing always, not always, but almost all the time in a very neutral way. You know what I mean? It wasn't too heavy. It wasn't too light. It was like, you know, like a ghost is playing, really, not a real human being or a robot. So I think it helps me a lot to dealing with this kind of documentation process and writing about this kind of witness stuff. I don't know if I gave you an answer.
No, that was great. I think the importance of formalist guardrails. I don't think you would call yourself a formalist, but I think there's definitely a telegraphic bent to some of your work, right? That does have formal structure, obviously, and requires.
Yeah, I think I am very formalistic person in the way that, you know, that I work for 12 years as a person in office. You know, that I'm doing the same thing for 12 years. I'm going at the same time to the work. I'm living at the same time. I've got same outfits for 12 years, the same pot on my head. You know what I mean? I'm very formalistic, and I'm doing the thing as straight and direct and detailed as I can, and I need these formal aspects, these uniforms aspects, to be in some way not so close to this horror. You know what I mean? That I need a wall. I need something that will not took me to the melodramatic hell. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying about melodramatic hell because there is a lot of art which is dealing especially with the horror of Holocaust, and it's, you know what I mean, that it's melodramatic, it's kitschy, there are a lot of this kind of situations, and I think it's not the best thing to do with this tragic situation.
May I suggest that we read another section of your work? And
Right.
this time we chose a slightly longer poem entitled, which Burning is the English translation, Wydar, in Polish. And Zach, this one I'm wondering if I can ask you to read from the English while I show the Polish. So we'll just hear the English and we'll read the Polish. Is that possible?
Yep.
You have the English in front of you. And
Yep.
Grzegorz, this poem, do you want to say a word about it? Is it an earlier piece? I know that you have several volumes that have been developing on the same material, and this is a newer translation of an earlier piece, I think you were saying.
Yeah, it's a poem from the book called Radości, and Peter Constantine translated it kind of 2 weeks ago, and it's a kind of a key poem, and I think it's there are fragments of in some way fragments or analogical situation to the beginning of Spoon River anthology of Edgara Lee Mastersa, and then there are also analogical parts or fragments from the Wasteland of T.S. Eliot. So
I actually pulled out those sections, and we can talk about them a little bit as influences afterwards. Let's do the reading. So for the audience, I'm going to show the Polish for those of you who read it, but we're going to hear English. Okay, Zach, please go ahead.
Burning. 1. Where are Isaac, Moshe, Bethel? They are all asleep here beneath this soil. Where are Rachela, Stefan, Alexander? They are all asleep beneath this soil. In Stavisky, in Tikotin, in Radжилov, in Sheshev, in Drohitchin, in Jedwabne. 2. He had butchered 18 Jews, he told me this in my apartment as he installed my stove. And the sun still shines upon his house and the generations of his family. You raped a Jewess behind the mill, and then you slashed her throat. In the village, he is greatly respected, despite being a bachelor, despite being decrepit. And to this day, a sign hangs on his door, Jews, gypsies, and devils not welcome. He hit a child with an iron rod, brain spattering upon his clothes, and made its mother clean the mess. He worked in the fields, toiling late into the night. He was kind to his dying mother. Let us judge him not in his hour of need. They began beating her, turning her white body black. There was so much chaos in those days, such everyday misdemeanors and transgressions might now seem something special. 3. O Lord, thou pluckest us from their hands, burning, burning in the barn, burning.
Yeah, so this is the first poem, which is which begins this anti-Wagnerian tetralogy, Radości, Spalanie, Sowo, and the Karl Heinz M is the last part. So this is very, of course, I wrote it rather in an unconscious way, but it's, yeah, I think it begins like a Spoon River anthology by Edgara Lee Mastersa, and I think, but by the way, I saw it, this similar situation many years after that. I guess a few weeks ago when Peter was translating that. But anyway, I think this is the key poem because it introduces us into this this hell, and from this very first poem we can see that I use these filters and I use these walls, or that I use something to help me with dealing with this tragedy. So for me, for example, Spoon River anthology by Edgara Lee Mastersa was one of the biggest revelations when I'm dealing with the history of Poland, which is very weird. Because,
say a word about it. So Edgara Lee Mastersa is an American poet. The anthology is not very well known today, but it was a book-length collection of epitaphs for the dead of individuals from a fictional town called Spoon River. I think it was published in 1915, and the individuals speak in their own voices, and there's a sense that they are speaking from beneath the territory of a cemetery, and they speak very unguardedly. It's a kind of brutal naturalism in a way similar to, I think, Comparable, and I would ask you, and maybe as an inspiration to what you chose to do. They speak about their secrets, their lives, their loves, but also their crimes, all of the untold aspects of their life. And there was an emphasis in that work on psychological realism that doesn't hide the human experience. Were you emulating that? Actually, do you mind for one moment if I just give an example?
Right.
Just one moment. I pulled out.
Right.
So, the beginning of that anthology, I think, is what you're referring to when you say the beginning. Where are Elmer, Herman, Bert, Tom, and Charlie? The weak of will, the strong of arm, the clown, the boozer, the fighter, all are sleeping on the hill. There's a kind of kind of epigrammatic form that Masters uses, there's an invitation to draw like a kernel of meaning out of each of these individual stories. And I'm wondering if you, in a way, think of your small poems as also an invitation to a kind of insight, or whether you think of them as kind of a dark parody of an epigram that leads to no insight, that reveals only meaningless or the impossibility of revelation.
I really don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. But I think that I don't know how to you know I think that the point of Edgara Lee Master's anthology is the situation of uncovering something which is covered, and which is hidden. So I think that's the very important point for me. But on the other hand, I just like or love his storytelling. That's why I love short stories by Kafka. I just love literature. So very important thing in this strange memory art project is that, of course, history is very important. This tragedy is very important. My roots are very important, but we shouldn't forget about pure art and art of talking, art of storytelling, art of composing, and sometimes art of joking in a very dark way. Last time when we were talking at Johns Hopkins, I told about, I guess it was there, about Magic Flute by Mozart. Every day I'm also listening to Magic Flute by Mozart, and I think this is the perfect situation in art when in both time, in the same moment, you've got something which is funny and horrific and terrible. You know what I mean? And anyway, I really love American poetry, and Walt Whitman is for me, the biggest literature figure in the world. So, and in some way, Edgara Lee Masters is a son of Walt Whitman. So for me, it very helped me in my memory project, but it was also a pure pleasure to read his great book. And I'm reading Spoon River anthology once per year, always for many years.
That is fascinating. I'd like to show the reference you referred to T.S. Eliot at the end of the poem and talk a little bit about those resonances. Can I do that? Hold on a second. Is that okay, Grzegorz?
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned that the end of the poem, it's an example of part of Spoon River anthology. The end of your poem is basically referring to, or it's an allusion to the end of part 3 of The Wasteland, that ends, la la, Carthage, then I came, burning, 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 O Lord, thou pluckest me out, O Lord, thou pluckest, burning. And if I could ask you, it's fascinating to see that you made that connection, that was an influence for you. So when I think about that poem, when I think about T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and in this passage in particular, again, a mood of nihilism seems to prevail in that here T.S. Eliot is kind of referring to two theological traditions, Buddhism and Christianity, to Buddha's fire prayer and to St. Augustine's Confessions, both of which seem to promise a way that the human individual can be lifted out of the depravity of worldly bodily existence and somehow saved. But here they're suspended, they're not able to be lifted out. They can't be plucked, because in T.S. Eliot, in Augustine, St. Augustine is plucked away from temptation, is plucked away from depravity by faith. And is this sense of the impossibility of any escape, the nihilistic stuckness in this depraved 21st, 20th century, is this part of what you were trying to do by that reference?
I really don't know, because I really, most of things I really made in an unconscious way, in the way that I'm very formalistic and I'm doing things in rather big order, but I don't know. I'm rereading T.S. Eliot always once per year, and Wasteland and all of his poems. So it's always close to me. But I just thought that it had, of course, T.S. Eliot is making a quote from St. Augustine, but I didn't know about that. Peter Constantin told me that when he was translating it. But I think that this is kind of a horrible prayer of these people murdered. You know, that the people are asking, or they are thankful to Lord that He took them from this bloody Polish land, something like that. You know, it's very literal in some way. You can read it in a metaphorical way, but you can read it also one-to-one. That someone is grateful that this is the end of this horror on, for example, Jedwabne territory. So I think, I don't know, you know what I mean? I really don't know. Sometimes there are some poems, for example, there is a poem in Karl Heinz M called Oinking. It's called Oinking, I guess. And I don't know what is it. You know what I mean? That I don't know why I wrote it. I don't know what is the meaning of this poem. I know that it's important poem and it should be there, but I don't know what is the sense of it. So I think that the same story is here. That I'm not sure, but Zach, I guess.
Can I invite Zach? Are you, I understand, possibly interested in translating the poem into Yiddish, and what resonates for you with it?
I do think that transition, that end transition into some sort of even amoral territory. You know, what there's been massacre and tragedy, and then you're asking you're asking God to pluck you out into a realm, into a. I like what you said, Karen, about nihilism, or maybe even self-abnegation. Right? There's destruction of the self, there's destruction of humanity, and there's a burning, and in that, after the massacre, maybe preferable to that is nothing at all, right? And so that really spoke to me. And then the beginning of the poem, talking about ordinary names, ordinary Jewish names, reminded me a lot of Yiddish memorial poetry and Yiddish poems that start with these names. Where are these people? Where are these people who we knew by these names? And yes, as a translator, right, one's natural tendency is to read a poem and say, "This is a great poem. I should translate it." It's sort of a background music of my life, right? That I say this to about so many poems, and this one I'll actually hope to get to. And I don't know, I know very minimal Polish, but as Eastern European, Jew of Eastern European heritage, one thinks that one should know Polish, even if one doesn't, and I know some. And the fact that it's, even just the last verse or the last section that you showed, O Panie, right? I mean, of course, O Lord in Polish, but Pani is sort of, in Yiddish literature, one of these terms that's left over, right? It's how the Jewish landholder refers to the poritz, refers to the Polish landowner, right? So it's very interesting to see it in that context. So it spoke to me just in many ways,
Okay, and so we've been looking at, I meant to ask you about the choice of the English language translator, because Vidar is the plucked out, or was, being plucked out, and your translator chose burning. Do you have anything to say about why what that does to it, that different choice?
My idea of working with Peter Constantin is that he's got, of course, he's asking me some questions, and I guess he was asking also about this title thing, but I think he's always right in the way that I think he's a great translator, and music here and his intuition and taste is most important. And I heard a lot of great things about his translations from Alice Oswald or George Saunders. about translations of my poems, and they wrote me that it sounds like a poems written in an English language. So I just trust him, and I don't want to be too pedantic, and you know what I mean, that please be closer to Polish language, because I think that we are not, with Peter, we are not searching for being as close as possible to Polish language, but we are looking for. I know that maybe for some of the people it will be banal, sound like banal, but we are like Don Quixote who are searching for moral awakening in a reader. We really believe in a moral awakening situation and moral shock and ethical shock. So I think that this is most important thing in this translation work, that Peter is trying to make this process of moral awakening, or eventuality of moral awakening, ethical awakening. And I think I'm doing the same in the poetry, that I'm trying to make something which is for me shocking in a moral way, and it gives me a lot of questions about my behavior, about, you know, my relations, about this kind of things.
We had one small last group. I think we should read. Let me share again.
You mean about my grant? This is very special.
Oh, I didn't, but let's do that. So I have here something that you shared with me, Grzegorz, which you discovered during your research and one of your visits. Can you explain what they are?
Yeah, it's very important thing to me. I don't know if I've got a proper distance to say about it, but in one of the book published by Stutthof concentration camp, Museum of Stutthof concentration camp, there was a book about youth in the Stutthof concentration camp, and I was reading it, and I found that there are notes and quotes from my grandfather, and I didn't know that they exist. So he wrote kind of a memorial, camp memorial, and he sent it to them in 70s. So this is a part of it on our screen, and I found out that, which is really weird and strange, that I'm writing in very similar way to him. You know what I mean? That he was writing. It's just only one little example, but he was writing with the help of paradoxes. He was using all the time paradoxes. And this is my methodology of making kind of a scandalous paradoxes all the time. And for me, it was very surprising that, because I didn't talk a lot of him, because he wasn't a person, you know, so open person, because he was broken. But for me, it was, you know, I believe, not that I believe, it's proven that there is a genetic memory. So, you know, maybe it's because of that.
Can I ask you to read them in Polish and English? The statement, that this fragment, which almost becomes a kind of, like you said, can I ask you to read the Polish and Zach the English?
All right. Komando las dla mnie skończyło się zmiażdżeniem 3 palców lewej ręki, ale z braku temperatury nie kwalifikowałem się do otrzymania pomocy, zamiast której zostałem skopany.
Forest commando detail for me ended with crushing 3 fingers of my left hand, but having no fever, I did not qualify to receive help, instead of which I was kicked.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, this is, you know, example of this moral scandal. It's you know, it's little thing, but you know what I mean.
But it must have been a fascinating, and when thinking about post-memory and the possible languages that speak to you, that come down to you, it must be a fascinating experience for you to see that.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna go to a very short third set. Okay, Grzegorz, go ahead.
Karl Heinz M. Miałem 14 lat, wysterylizowano mnie.
I'm sorry.
Moving. It's all right. Miałem 14 lat, wysterylizowano mnie, ponieważ nie potrafiłem odróżnić strumienia od potoku i drabiny od schodów.
Karl Heinz M. I was 14 years old. I was sterilized because I couldn't tell the difference between a brook and a stream, between steps and stairs.
Richard Glazar. Przybyliśmy do Treblinki o 15:30. Tłoczyliśmy się przy oknach, zobaczyłem zielony płot, baraki i usłyszałem coś, co przypominało pracujący silnik rolniczego traktora. Byłem zachwycony. Miejsce przypominało mi gospodarstwo rolne. Cudownie, pomyślałem. Dostanę robotę, na której się trochę znam.
Richard Glazar. We arrived in Treblinka at 15:30. We crowded around the windows. I saw a green fence, barracks, and I heard something that resembled a running tractor engine. I was delighted. The place reminded me of a farm. Wonderful, I thought. I'll get a job about which I know a thing or two.
Szymon Srebrnik. Nie wierzyłem, że ja przyjadę jeszcze do Polski, do Chełmna i będę stać na miejscu, gdzie mnie zabili. Nie, nie, nie.
Szymon Srebrnik. I didn't believe I would return to Poland again, to Chełmna, and that I would stand where they killed me. No, no, no.
Grzegorz, the last one.
Ernst Junger. Wojna zawiodła mnie. Nowoczesna wojna. Nie spełniła moich oczekiwań. Nie dorosła do swojego literackiego modelu. Na przykład nie było na niej koni.
Ernst Junger. War has let me down. Modern war has not met my expectations. It didn't live up to its literary ideal. For example, there were no horses.
Okay, thank you. We're drawing toward the end of our part, and we'll still have about 15 minutes to take questions if any of you want to put them in the chat. I want to just say, is that okay, Anna? Are we okay with that? About 15 more minutes? Is that okay? I just, I want to ask another, I think I want to approach the question of memory through another review I read of your work, if that's okay, Grzegorz. I think it might have been Leszek Szaruga who wrote a long piece placing your work in the tradition of Mickiewicz's romantic 19th century play, Dziady, Forefathers' Eve. And you've said several times today in our discussion, I wasn't thinking of that. And I think this is another one of those situations where it might be that it was discovered by, you know, us, the reader, and by this critic. But what that meant for him is that he sees a kind of continuation in your work of the tradition of summoning the dead. Calling the ancestors or forefathers. And this is based on this work of romantic literature that is structured around a folk ritual, Forefathers' Eve. It's the central work in the Polish cultural imaginary. It also burdens the contemporary Polish population with this sense of martyrology. But what he was talking about here was the idea that one of the things in that poem, Forefathers' Eve, is that the dead who are summoned on the night of Forefathers' Eve, they're not able to pass on, they're not able to settle, they're in limbo. They require the participation of the community to allow them somehow to find their rest. And was it Szaruga who wrote this?
I think because
I'm sorry.
Andrzej Fabianowski, I guess it was Professor Andrzej Fabianowski.
I apologize. And so it points to a powerful aspect of your poems, which is the Jewish subjects of your poems. And I know not all of your poems are about Jewish subjects, but the Jewish subjects are not others. They become part of the community. They become part of the forefathers. They somehow become our or your dead. And I think this stirs an interesting question. Maybe it's not a problematic question, but I think it's a question that comes to people's minds. To what extent have the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, are they also ancestors of present day Poland? Are they forefathers of present day Poland? Does poetry like yours make them an integral part of Poland's cultural imaginary? How would you think about that question?
I think it's a very hard question, because for me it's obvious that, you know, that they are part of our culture and history, and for me it's obvious, but I think it's not obvious for most of people in Poland, and I think that Poland is still very anti-Semitic country in a very big way, unfortunately. So yes, yeah, but maybe it's not a hard question, because for me the answer is very obvious. But it's all mixed in some way. I told on last meeting at Johns Hopkins, I said that, for example, mother of Tadeusz Różewicz was a Jewish person. You know what I mean? And most of Polish people don't know that. In some way, by the fact, Tadeusz Różewicz is a Jewish poet. But he's a Polish poet. He's Polish poet, Jewish poet. For me, it's not a problem. You know what I mean? But most of people, I think that most of people would have a problem with this.
The cultural and literary genealogy is something also to be kind of recovered, uncovered, looked at anew, and in that way, it becomes impossible, you're suggesting, to separate Jewish and Polish ancestry or genealogy in terms of memory and cultures. Is that what you're subscribing to?
I don't know. I don't know. Great. For me, it's one body, in the way, one body of humanity, and the biggest tragic problem is that they were killing each other. That Germans, with the help of collaborators, were killing Jews. This is the biggest problem. You know what I mean? But I'm really maybe a bit of naive person, but the lyrics of Imagine by John Lennon, I really believe in this kind of stories, and or even All You Need Is Love. I really believe in this kind of stories. So I'm really, I admire a situation when we've got when we can make a dialogue, when we can talk, when we can discuss, when there are many perspectives, and and I'm sure that Jewish culture is a part of a Polish culture. It's for me it's totally obvious, but I think I'm in minority. Unfortunately.
Well, okay, I'll leave that for people to discover. And Zach, I just wanted to invite you if you had any other questions or reflections.
Well, I think it's a reflective relationship, or a bijectional relationship, to use a mathematical term. Just as there is no Polish identity, I say this as a non-Polish person and not acquainted, right? But my impression is there is no contemporary Polish identity without seeing the survivors as bound up with that identity, and seeing the Holocaust as bound up with identity. Just so, reflexively, Jewish identity, not just without the Holocaust, which is a truism, but without that long-standing relationship between Jews and Poland, right? That complicated death-dealing relationship, right? That's a part of this, of the imaginary, to use that term. So it goes both ways.
And what do you think, dear Karen, about that, if I can ask?
I think that the more the deeper I enter into every aspect of Polish culture that I study, yes, the more intertwined become the sources of the imaginary, of the beliefs, of the dreams of all ethnicities living on Polish lands, that they pass back and forth, many elements that are basic building blocks of Polish or Jewish culture that get passed back and forth. I guess I feel it's very powerful, the concept of Jewish culture as absolutely unremovable ancestry of present day Poland. And
can I give one more brief example? I think the more I read and translate the Yiddish poet Avram Sutzkever, who was obviously in the Vilna ghetto, the more I find the need somehow to get enough Polish to read in the original Cyprian Norwid, right, who was one of Sutzkever's identified poetic ancestors.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
So realizing that my own poetic work owes so much to Stutzkever, and so being owed in an indirect way to Norvid as well is, I think, yes.
I want to mention, sorry, you took me a bit off. I wasn't expecting your question, Grzegorz, I apologize. I want to mention that, in addition to being a poet, you're part of an art rock psychedelic post-punk band. And there may be some people here who don't know that. From Gdańsk, we referred to it at the beginning, it's Trupa Trupa, which unfortunately means corpse. And one critic described your music as the Beatles sing Joy Division. Ominous guitars, stern rhythms, and haunting melodies, combined with lyrics that explore the darkest side of the human condition. The band includes Tomek Pawluczek, Wojtek Juchniewicz, and Rafał Wojczal. I wanted to recognize all of you here and hope that the audience will go to YouTube and look up Trupa Trupa, spelled Trupa. And I wanted to congratulate you on your success and your international renown as an indie band. And I'm interested in thinking about the international kind of perspective of your band and how well known it is, about for you the relationship between the global and the local. So we've been talking so much about Gdańsk, about Poland, about the memory of your family, and your band takes you into a very different kind of non-Poland specific conversation. Do you feel like your poetry crosses those boundaries too? What's most universal in it?
I think that this music of Trupa Trupa and my poetry resonate in bigger way outside of Poland than in Poland, and I don't know why. Maybe I don't know why, but anyway, yeah. More often I'm discussing the music and the literature, for example, with you, and not with Polish scholars, but what I want to say that, yeah, I think that we are very good in making some platforms of dialogue, and we are very good in making some networking connections which are full of love and friendships. And I think that it's even more important than art and the music, that, you know, that when you're traveling and you're meeting new people and you're on festivals, the point is not making money, and the point is not having great reviews, but the point is, you know, meeting great people and trying to make this world a bit better place. And I think it's not obvious behavior in 2021. And I think this, is also part of a Gdańsk heritage, because I told you about this dark story about the Stutthof concentration camp, which is very close to Gdańsk, but on the other hand, Gdańsk is a city of solidarity, and Lech Wałęsa is from Gdańsk, and, you know, the solidarity movement in some way crushed, you know, communism in Europe, and so I think that we here in Gdańsk are in some way, I don't want to say bad thing about the others, but I think that we are really open-hearted and open-minded for making some friendships and relations and talking and you know what I mean, and searching some ideas for making this world a bit better place. So I think that most important thing in our art and in my poetry is searching for these platforms of dialogue. Of course, the art is really important, and we really take care about art, and we try to compose as best song as we can, but we also take care, or, you know, about human beings all around us. You know what I mean? For example, Trupa Trupa has got democratic structure as a band, which is really almost you know, it doesn't happen in 99% of rock bands. You know, there is always leader and one vision, and we are discussing everything, voting everything, which is very difficult. You know, a lot of arguments and stuff, but this is the democratic world.
I think in a way you, I don't know if you're reading the questions. I think in a way you brought an answer to a question that came from Alicia Rose. Can you imagine finding peace with the past one day, writing about presence? And you're talking about forms of activism or art that reach across boundaries in the present, that build community. Are you involved with any other projects of that kind besides your music?
But it was questions of Alicia, right? Can you imagine?
I was connecting it. Hers is more open-ended. Can you imagine finding peace with the past one day and writing about presence, or perhaps the present? And I think you started to go in that direction when you talked about participating in your art.
I think that I'm writing about presence in a way that I'm sure that these history lessons, or I think this is all about our presence and our human nature. So I always think that I'm doing something which is related to nowadays situation, always. So I'm not reconstructing past to to act like a historian or archaeological, I think that by it's another banal from my side, but by understanding the past, you can make the future a bit better. I think it's obvious, and that's what I want to do with my art. Yeah, and for example, in the past for 5 years, I was coordinator of Amnesty International in City of Gdańsk. So in the past, I was more active in a activist way, but then I moved on more on art territory. But still, I think that the human tragedy of violence is the biggest topic of my art.
Okay, I don't think that we have more questions to you, Grzegorz, in the chat.
Can I say, because I see a lot of friends here, Thomas, so I'm super thankful to Tomasz Pocz, to Romana Kolarzowa, Robert Blobaum, Rebecca Klein, Przemysław Hojnos. Oh my God, a lot of great friends are here in the chat. Deidre Berger, my German translator Bernhard Hartmann. A lot of great friends. So greetings for you, dear friends. Thank you for being in some way in this community, because we are making event after event, and I think and I hope that because of these events we will. It's not only about talking about my poetry and Trupa Trupa, but I think it should have more to do with ourselves. You know what I mean? That our inner ability to be worse or better.
And Grzegorz, I also, I'm not controlling the chat, but I also, I think we received a message. Feel free to read back and see if there are other questions that you would like to answer there.
Right, 1 second, please. I think it's all good.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to discuss your work with you. It's an honor to be on this panel with you and Zach. I'm so glad the Jewish Culture Festival is bringing these, conversations to people all over the world. And I want to, from my side, wish everybody peace and a good Shabbos. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Zach.
I would like to thank all of you. Thank you, Karen, Grzegorz, and Zach, for being here with us during the 30th Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, an event held by the Galicia Jewish Museum. Thank you for this very deep and moving discussion about Grzegorz poetry. I've been listening to it carefully, and I'm really happy that we could host this event and that we could have this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.